21:17 at night, according to multiple sources, inside a quiet hospital room washed in cold white light. King Sunny Adé, the legendary Nigerian music icon, is believed to have taken his final breath at the age of 79 after a painful battle with late-stage cancer. The news did not arrive gently. It spread like a shockwave, sudden, heavy, almost unreal. A man who once commanded stages filled with rhythm and life, now leaving in silence, in a room where the only sound, as some described, was the faint hum of machines that had slowly stopped outside the hospital. Tension lingered in the air. Phones kept ringing, voices whispered in disbelief, and somewhere along a dim corridor, his daughter, Damilola Esther Adeniyi, was seen standing still, her hands trembling, her eyes fixed on nothing, as if reality itself had refused to settle. Earlier that same day, according to reports, his condition had worsened dramatically. The illness that had quietly grown inside him for months had reached its final, unforgiving stage. Doctors moved in and out, their faces serious, their voices low, each passing minute heavier than the last. Inside the room, the once vibrant figure of King Sunny Adé lay weakened, his breathing shallow, his body carrying the weight of a battle that few truly understood. And beside him, Damilola remained, watching, waiting, holding on to fragments of hope that seemed to slip away with every second. Some say she tried to speak, to call him back, to remind him of the music, the memories, the life he built. But the silence answered louder than any words. As the night deepened, the inevitable moment arrived. Quiet, almost unnoticed, except for the shift in the room, the stillness that followed, and the unspoken realization that something irreversible had just happened. Outside, the world had not yet caught up, but inside that corridor, everything had already changed. Damilola, according to those nearby, slowly stepped back, her expression frozen between disbelief and grief, her body refusing to move forward, as if crossing that invisible line would mean accepting a truth too painful to bear. Hours later, the news began to spread beyond the hospital walls. Fans, friends, and admirers struggled to process it. Many remembered the energy, the sound, the legacy, but few could imagine the final moments filled with such quiet suffering. And yet, behind every headline, there was a daughter, standing in a hallway, replaying the last look, the last breath, the last moment she held her father's presence. As the night stretched into early morning, the hospital lights remained the same, unchanged, indifferent. Nurses walked past, doors opened and closed. Life continued in fragments. But for Damilola, time seemed to have stopped entirely, somewhere between the last heartbeat and the silence that followed. She remained there, caught in that space, where memories and reality collided, where every second felt unreal. And in one small corner of that long corridor, beneath the cold glow of artificial light, there was a figure who did not move, a daughter who had not yet stepped away, as if waiting for a voice that would never call her name again. The pace slows down, as if the world itself takes a breath, and time begins to rewind, long before the hospital room, long before the silence. King Sunny Adé was a force that seemed impossible to fade, a name that echoed far beyond Nigeria, across continents, across generations. According to many admirers, his presence on stage was not just performance. It was power. It was identity. It was something people felt deep in their bones. The lights would rise, the crowd already roaring, packed, arenas trembling with anticipation. And then the music would begin, rhythmic, hypnotic, alive. And he would step forward, calm yet commanding, dressed with elegance, moving with a confidence that suggested he belonged exactly where he stood, at the center of it all. In those moments, there was no sign of weakness, no hint of fragility, only brilliance, only control. Some say his smile alone could silence thousands, that his voice carried not just melody, but history, culture, pride. He wasn't just entertaining. He was representing something larger, something timeless, and yet, behind that dazzling surface, behind the applause that never seemed to end, there were fragments, small, almost invisible cracks that no one paid attention to. Long tours that stretched across countries, nights that turned into mornings without rest, flights taken in exhaustion, schedules that left no room for pause, according to sources close to the industry. There were moments when he appeared slightly withdrawn, a little slower than usual, a brief pause between songs, a hand resting longer than expected on the microphone stand. But the crowd never noticed. Or perhaps they chose not to, because legends are not supposed to falter, not in front of thousands, not under lights that demand perfection. And so, the signs were dismissed, explained away as fatigue, as age, as the natural cost of greatness. But somewhere beneath all that, something had already begun, something silent, something growing, an unseen presence that did not care about applause or legacy. It moved quietly, patiently, as he continued to give everything to the stage, to the music, to the people who loved him. And even in moments when the body hesitated, the spirit pushed forward, refusing to break, refusing to slow down. Fans would later recall those performances, the energy, the intensity, but also the subtle changes, the moments where his gaze drifted for just a second too long, where his breath seemed heavier, where the music carried not just joy, but something deeper, something almost like a warning. Yet no one could fully understand it at the time, because the story still looked perfect, still sounded perfect, still felt untouchable. And perhaps that is what made it even more painful. The realization that while the world was celebrating a legend at his peak, the first quiet steps of a tragedy had already begun, hidden behind the lights, buried beneath the applause, waiting, growing, unnoticed. The rhythm tightens again. The story begins to crack. According to sources, it did not start with anything dramatic. Just a small, almost forgettable pain, a discomfort that came and went, something easy to ignore, something a man like King Sunny Adé had likely felt many times before after years of relentless touring. But this time, it stayed. It returned, again and again, growing slightly stronger, slightly more persistent, until it could no longer be brushed aside. At first, those around him reportedly thought it was exhaustion, the natural toll of decades spent under pressure. But then, the performances began to change. A show postponed here, another quietly canceled there, appearances becoming less frequent, interviews shorter, smiles more controlled, and fans, slowly, began to notice. Whispers started forming, questions without answers, because the family, according to many accounts, chose silence, protecting him, shielding the truth, holding on to the hope that perhaps it was nothing serious, perhaps it would pass. But behind closed doors, inside hospital corridors and private consultations, The reality was unfolding in a way no one could stop until the moment came. The diagnosis: late-stage cancer. A single sentence that, as described by those present, seemed to drain the air out of the room. Everything froze. Time hesitated. And in that fragile silence, Damilola Esther Adeniyi was there, standing close, listening, and then breaking. According to witnesses, she burst into tears right there in the hospital room, unable to hold back the weight of what those words meant, the future collapsing in an instant. The man she had always seen as strong, suddenly fragile, suddenly human in the most painful way. The machines around them continued their steady rhythm, indifferent, cold, while her father, lying on the bed, reportedly turned slightly toward her, and despite the pain, despite the exhaustion, he tried to smile, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, as if he wanted to protect her from the very reality he was trapped in, as if reassurance was the last thing he could still give, even when his own body was beginning to fail. Days turned into nights, and nights into long stretches of waiting, each one heavier than the last. His strength fading little by little, walking becoming difficult, steps uncertain, sometimes needing support just to cross a short distance. His voice, once powerful enough to fill arenas, began to weaken, words coming out slower, softer, sometimes unclear, forcing those around him to lean closer, to listen harder, as if every sentence carried something that might soon be lost forever. And his eyes, according to those who stayed near him, held a depth that was impossible to describe. Not just pain, but something unfinished, something unspoken, like there were thoughts, memories, perhaps even goodbyes, that never fully found their way into words. And Damilola remained there through it all, watching the gradual change, the slow unraveling, holding his hand, sitting through the silence, through the long hours where nothing seemed to happen, and yet everything was changing. The world outside continued as usual. Music still played, people still danced, but inside that quiet space, time moved differently, measured not in hours, but in breaths, in moments, in the fragile distance between hope and reality. And with each passing day, the truth became harder to escape. This was no longer something that could be hidden, no longer something that would simply fade away. It was a descent, slow, relentless, and impossible to reverse. The atmosphere grows heavier, almost suffocating. The hospital room no longer feels like a place of healing, but a silent witness to moments too painful to describe. Damilola, according to many who were present, barely left the chair beside his bed, hour after hour, day after day, her eyes red from exhaustion and grief, her hand tightly holding his, as if letting go for even a second might cause him to disappear forever. There were nights, long and unmoving, where she simply sat in silence, watching him sleep, counting each breath, listening to the faint rhythm of machines, and sometimes, without warning, she would turn away, wiping tears quickly, as if trying not to let him see, as if trying to stay strong for both of them. Doctors moved in and out constantly, their footsteps soft but urgent, their conversations quiet, fragmented, filled with pauses that spoke louder than words, occasional glances, subtle head shakes, small signals that carried enormous weight. Every detail in that room seemed to tighten the tension, every second stretching longer than the last outside the hospital walls. According to reports, fans continued to pray, Messages flooded in, voices filled with hope, people refusing to believe that a legend like King Sunny Adé could be nearing the end. They held on to the idea of a miracle, something unexpected, something that would turn everything around. But inside that room, reality followed a different path, one that no prayer seemed able to interrupt. Machines continued their steady sound. His breathing grew slower, heavier, each inhale a struggle, each exhale carrying a quiet finality. And in those last hours, time seemed to collapse into something fragile, something almost unreal, according to those close by. There was a moment, subtle, yet unforgettable, when he opened his eyes, slowly, deliberately, and looked at Damilola, not briefly, not in passing, but for a long, lingering stretch, as if trying to hold on to her image, to memorize every detail, every expression, as if that single look contained everything he could no longer say. She leaned closer, her voice trembling, calling his name softly, over and over, hoping for a response, hoping for anything. But the silence between them only grew deeper. And then, gently, almost imperceptibly, his eyelids lowered, the movement so quiet, so final, that it took a moment for the weight of it to settle. The machines did not stop immediately. The room did not change all at once. But something invisible had shifted, something that could not be undone. And Damilola, still holding his hand, remained frozen in that moment, as if time itself had refused to move forward, as if somewhere between that last look and the silence that followed, she was still waiting, still hoping, still listening, for a voice that would never come again. A late afternoon settles quietly over the hospital, the sunlight now faint, slipping through the window in thin, fragile lines, touching the empty room with a softness that feels almost out of place. The bed has been cleared, the sheets replaced, everything arranged as if nothing had ever happened. And yet, according to many who passed by, the air still carries something heavy, something that refuses to leave. On a small table by the wall, an old photograph of King Sunny Adé rests slightly tilted, as though someone had just picked it up and then put it back down too quickly. Outside, the world continues to speak loudly. Headlines describing the loss of a legend, voices recounting his achievements, his music, his legacy, but inside that room, none of those words seem to exist. Only silence remains, deep, unmoving, almost echoing. Damilola stands there, not in the same place, but not far either, her gaze distant, unfocused, as if she is looking at something no one else can see, her hand still gripping a small cloth, wrinkled, damp, held so tightly it seems impossible to release. Time does not feel real in that moment. It lingers, stretched, uncertain, in one quiet corner. The chair where she had sat for countless hours remains untouched, slightly angled toward the bed, exactly as it was left, as if waiting, as if expecting her to return and sit again, to continue a vigil that no longer has a purpose. Footsteps pass occasionally in the hallway, faint, detached, life moving forward somewhere beyond those walls. But inside, everything feels suspended, incomplete. And in that stillness, there is a presence that cannot be explained, not seen, not heard, but felt. Like a trace of something that has not fully faded, as though memory itself has taken shape in the room, lingering in the space between the window and the bed, between the photograph and the chair, and for a brief second, almost imperceptible, The curtain shifts slightly with the breeze. The light flickers. And in that fragile moment, it feels as if someone is still there, just beyond reach, just beyond sight. Watching, waiting, before the silence settles again, deeper than before.